Nice to meet you all. Glad you were able to attend. So I am joined today by Kevin Early, who is European CFO at Ares, and also Andrew Howlett-Bolton, who is CFO for EMEA at Carlyle. So really pleased that you could both join us. Fantastic. So we're here to talk about the virtual shift. So what has how have GPs adapted, if you like, over the past 18 months, to what's been quite an extraordinary time, and really thinking about the lessons that we've learned, what's here to stay in the new normal. So very exciting from my perspective. I must admit, I feel like I have experienced that in real life today. On the one hand, delighted to be here physically, seeing people face to face much better than doing a panel session, via Teams or what have you. On the other hand, I did have a nightmare getting here, so I had, both the pro and the con staring me in the face. But no, very, very interesting. So, Andrew, Kevin, I think for me, just to start off with, I'd be interested in just getting a feel for your last 18 months. What have you been seeing in the market? How's it been for you? But Andrew.
Sure, I can kick off. And actually, just firstly, kind of great to be here. It is really kind of like a novelty, so fantastic to do this in person. I probably kind of focus on two main themes from kind of our investment environment, which kind of really drives our business. Those two themes are adaptability and also velocity as well. And so just on adaptability, I mean, it is amazing kind of how far we've come as an industry, I'd say, kind of in the past 18 months. February 2020 seems like a lifetime ago, and it's really kind of interesting to see the various kind of stages kind of through the crisis. I know we kind of talk this stuff to death, but like it is actually the initial kind of crisis management, and kind of doubling down and kind of looking after your people and kind of looking after kind of your liquidity, and your main concern is kind of how do you stay in business, and then you move on to okay, how do we adapt? How do we grow? And it's super interesting. Everything I mean about the industry, I mean about kind of our investments, I mean about us as a firm as well. Pretty much kind of adapt and change every single kind of process that we have. Like how do we diligence assets? How do we engage with our investors? How do we do things like kind of our AGMs? And it's kind of like a myriad of different things that had to kind of change and adapt. And which I kind of personally think is amazing, and looking at really kind of the adoption of new technologies and kind of Zoom and Microsoft Teams, they get kind of the headlines, but there's a multitude of kind of other different things as well, and other different kind of processes that kind of fall behind it. You see kind of a increased use of data and analytics, and just well as kind of improved processes. And my personal favourite is the increased adoption of the electronic signature. So no more printing, no more scanning, and saving from that aspect as well. And that's just like one example of something that has just like such a like compound effect, that I can actually truly believe that kind of across the industry, our kind of efficiency and productivity has taken kind of like huge strides forward, and so like I say, kind of a quantum leap from where we were, I think, 18 months ago, and that also then kind of links to actually the velocity point. And I think kind of the investment environment is as active as I have seen it. I think the pool of actionable targets, I'm specifically kind of biased kind of towards like private equity here, but the actionable targets have expanded and increased. You see, I think, kind of founder and entrepreneur-led businesses that are kind of like reassessing kind of what they want to do, like during COVID. You see corporates with, I think, kind of increased kind of strategic initiatives, maybe kind of carving out of a kind of a non-core asset. You see kind of increased confidence, I think, in the UK. And the kind of ability to maybe kind of transact there more, and so it means that pool of targets has grown, but also we operate in a very competitive environment. So we all know there's more kind of dry powder than ever. And when you're kind of often kind of competing for assets, and there are really kind of three main areas on which you compete. It's your price, it's your certainty of execution, and then also your speed. And we've seen a kind of a dramatic shift in kind of that speed aspect. Obviously kind of valuations too, valuations are always high, but the speed has kind of made a big difference. And so processes are being done quicker, preempting is more common, or is kind of increasingly common. And you can think about it and take a step back and do you think, are there shortcuts being taken? And I'm not sure that they are. I think that there's increased conviction. I think going back to the adaptability point, I think people are a lot more kind of efficient in their processes, quicker in their decision making. I think they have better toolkits for diligence. And so I think just running up kind of processes is kind of that much harder. And so what it means is that more investments, speedier processes, things are getting done quicker. And so your kind of, 5-year, 6-year kind of investment period ends up often kind of being or can end up being kind of much shorter. That coupled with an active exit environment as well. Equity markets are open. As mentioned, kind of strategics are active too. And so portfolios are being turned. And ultimately kind of what that means is you're often coming back to market, maybe kind of quicker than you might expect. And so those fundraising cycles are or seem to be shortening as well, which is something that you obviously kind of need to manage very carefully with your investor base. But I think kind of in summary, kind of with those two themes, it's kind of pretty kind of exciting time at the moment. And I know it's been a tough time, but I think that there's a kind of a lot of positives to take out of certainly kind of where we've been and kind of where we're going.
Thank you. Yeah, no, really interesting. Kevin?
Yeah, look, I think Andrew hit on everything. I think the adaptability or agility point is probably key. We've changed a lot of the way how we work, what we do. Andrew mentioned some of the things. I'd like to think that as an industry, we probably would have evolved and adopted these practices inevitably, but obviously we probably would have moved a lot slower. I think what the pandemic did is kind of forced us to reevaluate how we work. I don't think any of us would have wished that upon ourselves, but I think it's been rather fortuitous, and we'll talk about the end, what's here to stay and what's not, but I think we've seen a lot of new dynamic reporting and data collection, things that we weren't doing before that frankly we probably should have been thinking about, but we're not. The only other thing I thought about when we addressed this topic for the 18 months, and I don't know how to wrap this up from a simple topic, but it's more kind of the human and societal element. And I don't know if there's a causal relationship with the pandemic or probably more correlation, but we spent a lot more time talking about our employee well-beings, work-life balance, and then go more broadly, things like DE&I, ESG. Again, we heard in the opening remarks, both of those topics are on the panel here. So they're becoming more elevated. I think, again, something that was happening prior to March 2020, but clearly seems to have been accelerated, on a societal basis, really probably driven by the LPs. Sure. But as we talk about new things, I look at that as a new paradigm in the business. Not only are we looking at traditional financial and performance metrics, we've also now got to look at ESG type metrics, DE&I. You're seeing it come into the fund finance world. You're seeing it come into your investor reporting. So I think that's another, from our context of a CFO, COO world, another area where you're having to be creative and respond accordingly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can completely see that. I guess as a funds lawyer, I'm very interested when you talk about those relationship elements. I'm really interested in kind of GP-LP relationships, if you like. But how have you found maintaining those and virtually as well?
Look, I'm surprised at how quick the LP community has adapted to virtual. We are historically accustomed to spending time face to face. We talk about this being a people-led business. People make their investment decisions based on, in some respect, relationships. But we pivoted very quickly to a virtual model, and our LPs have they've got capital to deploy. They didn't stop as a result of the pandemic, so I think they led some of the shift. But obviously, we did the same.
And what about building newer relationships? I mean, Andrew, I don't know what you feel about that. Presumably it's much harder to build a new relationship than it is to maintain an existing one online.
Yeah, I mean, I think for new LPs to underwrite kind of a new commitment and a new relationship to kind of a GP, obviously kind of you'd imagine that the preference is certainly kind of for have some face-to-face interaction kind of during that diligence process. However, I mean, there are some kind of mitigating factors, and so I think often, like I said, that new relationship is long in the gestation period. So that relationship is kind of built up over time, and so I think often you'll find that at some point in the past there is that they have had that kind of that face-to-face meeting, and also I think we all know we operate in a kind of a pretty small world, and so the degrees of separation aren't that great either. Maybe kind of someone has been employed somewhere else that kind of knew the investment team, or you have kind of say kind of a trusted kind of advisor or a contact that is able to kind of give you that third-party reference as well. But I think kind of the biggest thing is that the level of transparency is greater than it ever has been in the past. I mean, I think the ability for investors to lift the lid and look under the bonnet of a GP is huge. And so I think the level of reporting they get, the level of detail that they get into that reporting, the level of access they have kind of within the organisation. And you can argue that actually the kind of the virtual world has also kind of helped with that, because it's easier to get kind of broader investment teams together. Kind of easier to schedule and so I think that's kind of that's certainly helped. And actually, just back to Kevin's kind of original point, I mean, investors have also kind of adapted, and they are kind of extremely sophisticated and kind of moved with the rest of the industry to be able to transact. And so, whilst I think it could have been an impediment, I don't think it has been.
I mean, we managed to raise our largest fund during lockdown. We started marketing in April 2020, and if you'd have told me when we started that we would be successful and said, by the way, you won't leave the office, you'll be doing it all via Zoom. And admittedly, look, we are somewhat of an established brand. It was a repeat fund in a very in vogue, popular strategy. But again, having been through this previously, the amount of in-person meetings, Asian roadshows, and having people in the office and in-person due diligence. I thought it would be, if anything, it would be a disappointing result. Ultimately we would get there, we would make the efforts. Instead, we had one of our largest fundraisers ever, and it became very mechanical. The LPs figured out you would do these Zoom sessions. There'd be, a 3-hour block where you would jump from one Zoom call to the next, and your portfolio guys would be behind you, and then IR. And it would wrap up, and as you sit back from an efficiency and cost standpoint as a CFO, you think, well, this is great. Can we just do this forever now? I can stay at home. Obviously, I think we're going to kind of get to some mix. I think, I've talked to a few LPs now that things have opened up, and we've had people in London. I don't know that all the big institutions will re-up their travel budgets to where they are, but I do think it'll be important. And I think of the things that Andrew talked about. Look, if you're looking for renewals or re-ups from existing investors, if you're launching a successor fund, that's probably pretty easy to do from a light touch perspective. If you're a newly formed firm, if you're out with a first-time product, even an established firm, if you're trying a new product without a track record to exhibit, I think that's probably harder. But the one thing I've learned is I don't think you can say it can't be done. It has to be done in person. Again, we've seen institutions who previously wouldn't have dealt with us, come subscribe and never having stepped foot in our offices. And I think there will be some of that going forward, and it'll be. I think I'm curious to where that lands and ends up.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. It's amazing, isn't it, how you look at the past 18 months and you can really see how adaptable people have been, and some surprising achievements which have been fantastic. But yeah. So, Andrew, key lessons from your perspective?
Yeah, I think there are a few. I think the principal lesson, in my mind, is actually the same as kind of the great financial crisis in 2008, and it's kind of be prepared. Don't assume kind of the good times will kind of necessarily continue. And you could see it, and certainly kind of the senior management kind of within our firm as well. As soon as kind of the, I'd say kind of the pandemic became real, certainly kind of within Europe in February 2020, kind of a key focus on just particularly liquidity, and so making sure you had liquidity for your portfolio companies, kind of for your funds, and kind of whatever you needed. And so it is like simple things like kind of don't leave your kind of refinancings too late with your credit facilities, or kind of those sort of things. You don't know when the market's going to turn off, and the same goes for kind of fundraising as well. And just make sure you have kind of like enough lead time, so that you're not caught short. And so it was a kind of a lot of similarities to 2008 there. And then maybe kind of a couple other things which maybe kind of more on the softer side is kind of one is like the importance of culture. And so my personal view is that I think kind of during the pandemic, the kind of organizational culture built up beforehand kind of just helped to, I think, kind of like maintain kind of organizations kind of through that period, and also kind of help grow as well. But kind of like particularly important kind of in those kind of difficult times in the remote environment. Now, like culture kind of is just kind of incredibly important. It kind of, that's what really kind of help or encourages people to kind of go the extra mile. And so we had an operating executive at Carlyle say last week, which I thought was actually pretty insightful. Culture is what happens when people aren't looking. And I go a step further than that. However, but people need to see that culture in action. And so kind of when you're in a virtual kind of remote environment, it's not impossible, but it's harder to see. And so if you, I think there's certainly kind of risk if you stay remote for kind of like extended period of time, like the culture risks like potentially degrading. So I think it's important to see how in real life kind of how firms kind of think, what they believe in, how people act, how people treat each other, and those sort of things are kind of much easier in person. And so I do think as firms kind of have this kind of like this discussion about whether to kind of go back to return to the office versus kind of virtual, and I'm certainly not advocating returning full time, but when you're thinking about what kind of a hybrid environment looks like, it's critical to kind of pay attention to that cultural aspect, because like if you can get your people to kind of want to do more, then you multiply that across the organisation, and it's a very powerful driver. So that's one aspect, and linked to that is also just like team management and kind of really the softer skills, and again like just maybe kind of reiterating kind of what Kevin mentioned earlier. I mean, you have to look after your teams, and it is kind of amazing. Well, everybody without exception has been through some pretty difficult times over the past 18 months, whether physical, whether mental, whether kind of homeschooling or kind of various different things. Everybody's had like a different experience. When you're in that virtual world, and we all know this, that you just don't get those visual cues or kind of touch points. And so I've personally learned to have maybe kind of a different approach to management and be able to kind of adapt. And so, look, I mean, I think we've kind of put our teams through, we kind of mentioned about the level of activity. Our teams have done and changed processes. Our teams have done amazing things in the past 18 months. And so I think it's important for kind of us as kind of organizations to show gratitude, show goodwill, show understanding, and kind of that recognition. And so that could be kind of shown in kind of multiple different ways. I mean, compensation is the other one, is the main one, but there are other things too. I mean, you can, whether it's kind of experiences, training, time off, or other things that kind of might certainly kind of respond to that kind of encourage that kind of particular individual. So it's being kind of very like sensitive from that side. And maybe kind of just two final like quick fire things. Like one lesson is never in times of disruption, actually kind of look for ways you can make other positive changes that might be difficult, like during that might otherwise be difficult. And so during the pandemic, can you make a positive impact on processes, or maybe kind of rolling out kind of a new initiative or function, because just kind of like take advantage of say kind of organizational momentum. I think it's been important. And the other thing is just, I referred to it earlier, but the importance of transparency, particularly to LPs. We've gone through a journey, our portfolio companies have gone through a journey, LPs have gone through a journey as well, and so it's really critical to keep those touch points with LPs, share meaningful information on a timely basis, perhaps in a different way or kind of different content that you have done before, because I think that's a true differentiator.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Do you agree, Kevin?
Yeah, look, I hate going after Andrew because I think he hits on all the key points. Look, I think that's absolutely true. The one thing I would say is, kind of saying lessons learned, and it's probably a little early to say anything definitively, like this is what's going to happen. I know we're back in the office now, and you get people back, and as many people that I talk to who are thrilled to be back, and there's the congeniality and culture. There are other people who are, kind of saying, well, when can I work from home, or I don't like the commute. I think a lot of this is going to be in flux, and the one thing I love reading about this stuff and the changing of the workplace, and I think, look, as an industry, we're probably not at the forefront of that. If you look at the tech companies and some of the things that they do, it's much different, but it's also a different type of work. It's a different way of working. But for my team, look, I'll be honest, I'm a dinosaur. I've been doing this for quite some time, and I'm set in the ways that I work. Prior to the pandemic, working from home always felt like unnatural, not something that I was used to. I've learned to adopt that, but again, there's a generation of people now who are coming up and working now that are going to put different importance on things. So when you think about teams, I think the market is going to guide some of that, and I think we, as the stewards and business leaders, are going to have to adapt to that at some point and look at whether that's our employees. I think you're going to get the same thing from the LPs. You're going to, like any business, you're going to have a fundamental generational change, and some of the things that we've seen now, people are going to say, actually, I want more of this and less of this and more of this. And I think it's going to be upon us to retain things that are important, like culture and transparency, deliverability. We're still, I think most of us would say we run in results-oriented businesses, so none of that is negotiable. But how it's done, where it's done, the type of people we bring in to do it, the things that are important, I think, are going to change. And I think, we can still have an impact. I'm not that old that I'm not still going to have an impact, but it is something that's going to happen. And I see the people who work for me and the people coming in now have a very different experience, having started their careers with the pandemic as opposed to being 25 years in experiencing it. And then, for most of us, we're kind of reverting back. You get back to the office, you think, okay, we're back to normal. The number of times I've said back to normal because you're here at the conference, you're at a meeting, or you see people, you return to it. So I think for a lot of people, it's going to be different. So I am curious to see how that shakes out and what the world looks like, beyond this group here, but really the people that work for us.
Yeah, so super interesting. I do think it's an extraordinary time period, and very interested in all of your observations. I think for me, when I step back and I listen to you talk, there's that tremendous resilience and adaptability, I guess, that people have shown, the tremendous hard work and also the tremendous efficiency, right? All your comments about use of tech and how we've used that more and more over the past 18 months, and to the extent we can carry some of that forward into the new world, I think that's absolutely fantastic, and absolutely agree with all of your points around culture and the social elements to all of this, you were touching upon as well, Kevin. I think for me, both in terms of external relationships and in terms of internal relationships, that's obviously really important to focus on. And it does feel that some form of hybridity is key, isn't it? It's key for organisations, and exactly how that shakes out, as you say. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves. But yeah, no, really, really keen and interested to hear your observations there. I don't know if we've got questions.
I have a question for you.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think, look, Andrew and I come from fairly similar backgrounds, large global asset managers, established firms. I guess maybe, and again, I know you're in a big level. If you had people up in startup firms, even in the venture world, or do you see any difference from? It's very easy for me to say we're going to keep real estate and everyone's going to have a desk and we're going to come back in the office. I think there are a lot of people who are looking at hybridity because they're managing cost ratios. Does it cost? Do I need to have an office in Mayfair to attract LPs? And do I need to have my finance and accounting staff based in London, or can I put them in Slough or somewhere else where the real estate's cheaper? I'm curious if you're seeing anything maybe more creative than we're offering?
It is hard. No, it is hard. It is hard. I think if I look and, obviously I work with a whole range of clients. It's probably fair to say that most of my client base are, larger institutions like Ares and Carlyle. So probably some of the things that I have been seeing. I've seen the adaptability. I've seen the resilience. I've seen the big book of LP relationships, and so all of that is obviously fantastic. I think with the slightly smaller houses I've worked with, or slightly newer houses I've worked with, it's hard, right? I do think it's tricky to go out there and build your brand. If you've got a brand already to rely on, it's a little bit different, and that's where I think a bit of hybridity is really helpful, right? In that you can be out in the market at the times you need to be out in the market, and you can be at home being efficient in a way that, when you can be efficient. So that balance, I think, will be important for the smaller houses as well, in my view. But yeah, welcome views and comments from the floor. Has anybody got any questions for Andrew or Kevin?
I was interested in what Andrew was saying about tech and changing the way you do things. Sorry, Phil Bartram from Trevor Smith. Interested in what Andrew was saying about tech and developing new solutions, for example, DocuSign. I just wonder, do you think there's any danger that we've moved a bit too far toward, or is there a risk that we've run towards move fast and break things, and that there might be some things lurking under the surface on the risk side? I asked that because it put me in mind of a question I got from a client last week about DocuSign. They've got some share certificates. Is their share certificate valid when it's been signed by DocuSign? Bloody difficult question to answer, to be perfectly honest. But so you needn't pick on the specific, but is there a risk that things have gone fast and that auditors are going to pick up and stuff in the next period that we've gone too fast with?
I can maybe take a kind of initial kind of response to that, I feel. I'd say it's so important that kind of as part of any kind of build up of a technology platform, kind of risk management kind of forms kind of a crucial part of it. And so it's got to be done in kind of a measured and sensible way. And so whilst kind of we have moved quickly, I think it's certainly kind of our job to kind of make sure we're kind of assessing the risk, and it's done kind of in a kind of appropriate manner. And in my view, kind of the best kind of technology implementation is kind of done when you have kind of a subject matter expert, so somebody say with more of kind of a technology or say a digital background, coupled with someone from the business. And so that sort of project management skills and kind of build out means that you kind of often you can kind of move quickly, but also just kind of manage that risk.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think we should probably call it a day given we're out of time. But thank you both very much indeed. Really appreciated talking to you. I thought it was a very interesting session.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.